I think we're good, Steve.
All
I
right.
don't know. All right. So we're at episode 16 of Temporary Book Club. We are doing Candide. By Voltaire, or also known as Francois Marie Arouet. Is that how you say it? Arouet or Arouet?
Yeah, I think I've heard both, but I do think it is maybe Arroway.
Arouet. And then when I read a book, and then I go back and I watch some YouTube videos just to kind of think things that I might, just to do research. And I call it Candide, and I've been wrong. I didn't even have to tell anybody that. I could just kept it to myself because I
Yeah,
probably never said it out loud. But it's Candide, right?
true, true. I feel like I should make a confession at first too. I told Mike I'm coming directly from my in-laws came over this evening to have dinner, so we cooked out.
Nice.
I thought I was going to have more time to cram for the test than I did, but I do love Candide. I've definitely read it, so I'm hoping we'll have a good conversation. And I did notice that Voltaire has a famous quote where he says, "Judge a man more by his questions than his answers." So I feel like puts the pressure more on you than me. So
I love it. That's great. See, you win already. It's over. It's over. All right. So I'm with Steve Groh. Steve Groh did my inaugural episode. So I'm so glad he decided to do this one with me. He's actually signed up for another one coming up next spring. Do you remember that? Do you remember?
what do I got on my list now?
Good. Awesome. It's that, it was the Mary Roach book.
Oh
Remember?
yeah. Well, I've read, I don't even remember which one, but I've read pretty much everything.
It was Packing for Mars.
Packing for Mars. That's a good one. We'll
Have you read it already?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, good.
But
Good.
I'll try to reread it because, like I said, with Voltaire, I've read Candide a while ago, and then yesterday I started rereading it a little bit. So I'm hoping we'll have a good conversation.
We will. And Candide is not about I don't think, for me at least, when I'm putting these questions together, it's not about the story itself, right? It's not about like, hey, what? I don't think. I think it's more about what is he trying to accomplish? What's his goal here?
What's the philosophy behind it?
Exactly. So, Steve, introduce yourself for.
I am Steve Groh. I'm one of the teachers at Oak Hills High School. That's how Mike and I know each other. I'm mostly the photography teacher these days, but I teach regular art classes, and I really don't even know what year this is for me. I think it's either my 21st or 22nd year at Oak Hills, and probably my 24th or so year of teaching. Maybe, I don't know. Wow. It's to the point where you don't even remember anymore. How long have you been doing this? How long have you been?
I think it's 15. Yeah, isn't that funny? It's one of those things where I thought, though, I said 15 last year, but then when the other day it came up and I kind of counted it, I think it might be 15 this year. But the weird thing is people that too is your first year is 0, right? So it's like, how many years have you done it? But then how many years, so we go back and forth. So teachers are sometimes confused with that when you count steps.
Get lost. You reach a certain point and how long you've been teaching, how old you are, all questions that are best left kind of vague.
That's very true. Right. I think honestly, if I know I'm 44, but that takes me a second sometimes. Like, I think I always 44 last year.
I feel like I always think about the year, how old I'm going to be. And so often I'll convince myself that I'm already.
Yeah. I thought I was 44 all last year. I really did. Right. I really did. And that's silly.
Also, as a bald man, I apologize for the lighting. I might be throwing a lot of radiant.
I'm about 6 months away.
I mean, you've got a nice podcast setup. I've got to, if we keep doing these, I've got to improve my situation.
No, you look great. That setup looks perfect.
Good.
So you, when I said, hey, I need somebody for the fall, I was looking to add some more books, and I kind of just threw it at you. You actually, except for Mary Roach, you've picked all the books. You picked Swerve, which was awesome. And then you said Candide. And I'd read it. And it was one of those things where it was, of course, I wanted to jump on it because it's a classic, or I've read both too. That some people don't call it a classic, but anyways, it's a classic, and it's important. It's an important book. But what made you want to do this book?
Um, first of all, I thought Candide was really funny. A lot of people don't think it's that funny, I guess. I forced a friend recently I tried to force a friend to read it, and he, and it's a short book. Book is even a strong term. It's barely a book.
Right.
And he didn't make it through, so maybe he didn't find it as funny as I did. It's definitely a little dark, but I also, like you said, I feel like it's a book that's, it's of a philosophical bent. I think that's why I like the swerve is those are books about big questions, right?
Right. And that's why I think today is mostly going to be about the questions, not even what's in the novella itself. So let me just read the back for people. Voltaire wrote a book called Candide, or Optimism. It was the indifferent shrug or callous inertia that this optimism concealed, which so angered Voltaire, who found the, quote, all is for the best, end quote, approach a patently inadequate response to suffering and to natural disasters, such as the recent earthquakes in Lima and Lisbon, not to mention the questions of illness and man-made war. Moreover, as the rebel whose satiric genius had earned him not only international acclaim, but 2 stays in the Bastille, flogging and exile, Voltaire knew personally what suffering involved. In Candide, he whisks his young hero and friends through a ludicrous variety of tortures, tragedies, reversals of fortune, in the company of Pangloss, a meta-physio-sociological, cosmological, whatever. Honestly, I've never seen this word, of unflinching optimism. So Pangloss, just nothing could get him down. The result is one of the glories of the 18th century satire. Your buddy that wasn't interested at much, that was me. Okay, that was me. I wanted to read this book. As a history teacher, we'll talk about Voltaire in a second. I talk a lot about Voltaire. And then this book is, as a guy that's into literature, I thought, well, I gotta do this. And I think because of what it's supposed to be, I didn't relax the first time through it. Okay. Does that make sense?
Like just feeling tense about its position as a book type of thing that you were
and what am I supposed to get out of it? This is supposed to be this is a book by Voltaire, who, freedom of speech, freedom of religion, this big philosopher. And I did not expect like Kurt Vonnegut.
Yes.
Silliness,
That's so funny that you said that, because that was literally what I was about to say. Was I really love Kurt Vonnegut?
Yeah,
Voltaire is like the Kurt Vonnegut of the 1700s.
Well, as I'm reading 2 Vonnegut books for another episode coming up, I mean, that was it. As I read it the second time, which was this week.
Was that Sirens of Titan? What was that?
Yeah, Sirens of Titan. Okay. Yes. As I'm reading those books while I'm rereading book this week, I mean, that's definite parallel. I mean,
and it's the same sort of dark humor.
Yes.
And weird kind of matter of fact way of laying it out.
And and there's a philosophy behind it.
Right.
You know what it is. Yes. But when I'm going through Voltaire, I think it's something like you said, it's funny. The second time around, it was funny. The first time around, when you said that about your buddy, it struck a chord, because that's exactly how I felt. But I think it's the approach. Second time, it was funny. I could see what his ideas were. I could see what he was trying to do.
Yeah.
First time, if you obviously, I mean, how many people have read other Voltaire books? Right. You're not, and Voltaire doesn't have, when you talk about Voltaire, you're not talking about what you're talking about when you're talking about Vonnegut. Everybody knows what you're talking about when you say Vonnegut. Voltaire is honestly this philosopher, this enlightened philosopher. And so I think that threw me. I'm like, what am I supposed to be feeling? And then now I know it's supposed to be ridiculous. It's supposed to be fun.
It is this Well, first of all, one of the reasons I like doing these this sort of thing, this like book club kind of idea, is it forces you to look back at what you read, or maybe to do a little homework, or to think about it a little bit more. And one thing I did today was I was looking up on Amazon and thinking, Voltaire had such an unusual life, an interesting life. Like, he talked about him, being thrown in the Bastille multiple times.
Right.
And he didn't write, and by the way, he didn't write Candide. Of all the things he did write, which was quite copious, he did not write Candide until he was 65 years old.
Right.
And he'd already written a bunch of other things. And I thought, well, there must be some really great books about him, biographies. And there really aren't a lot.
Really?
There were a few. There was a few. One of the ones, I'm trying to think of the name of it, but I couldn't even find it in paperback. It was only hardback. And then there was maybe one other. And then there's lots of maybe somewhat specific books about, like this section of Candide's life. But you would think there's got to be
bio.
several.
Big bio. And that's, I agree too. And now, like you see about Cicero, or these names that are like Voltaire that stand out. You're going to find several books, bios about it, but not him.
I hope someone can maybe correct us if we're wrong. But I did not see. I'd be curious to know if anybody's read a good biography, which one they would choose. But I did not see a whole bunch of different options on that, and it seems like a life, well worth writing about, for sure.
Oh, definitely. I mean, when he released Candide, he wrote it anonymously. I guess he's just been through too much shit already.
Yes,
right?
It was Dr. Ralph was who he went with, and I guess he had a bunch of different pen names that he used at different times. But they said that this is 1759 when Candide is released, and it's skewering the church and the government to such a degree that I guess he was rightfully scared. I think he had built up enough well-placed patronage,
sure,
that he was a little bit protected. But I mean, that was still a time period to have big concerns. So
he became friends with a monarch. And I wrote it down. Do you remember?
Yeah, he was friends with Frederick the Great.
Frederick the Great, you're right. And then they fell out.
But he had other people too that really
wealthy French society.
So he was kind of connected in a variety of different ways, and that was kind of interesting too, because I read that about Frederick the Great, that some people think that relationship was more than a little friendly at some point. Sure. And I guess he had gone to live with him in Berlin or in Potsdam for a while. And then, like you said, that fell out. I mean, his life is as hard to follow. It's very much like Candide. It's almost episodic, and he's moving around from England.
Let me make a side note there. You're right. What is it about this time period when we did the swerve and we talked about the traveling there? Doesn't it seem like these people, like traveling and living other places, maybe it's just me, but it just seems so easy. It just seems like back then it's almost like, man, it's almost like, oh, I picked up and went here, and then I moved here, and then this.
Well, I mean, I guess, it's funny you just saying it's the first time I've really thought about it, but it does make you think. I mean, this is probably a time, obviously before passports, and must have been a certain ease of travel, I guess, in that time period of just pick up your stuff and move, and maybe you've got to report in with the local government, but maybe it was just,
just to be able to, I mean, not only when you're reading a biography or what people actually did, but just to put that in a novel. I mean, of course, Candide is very far-fetched, but I don't think the traveling part is. I think that probably just fit in with what some people did, and that really kind of blows my mind at that time. Steve, so let's go. You've told me why you chose the book. Okay, so it's all based on his view there during the time of the Enlightenment. And let me just jump in as a teacher real quick for people that don't know Voltaire. You know the name. Voltaire is known. He lived in France. He was a philosopher, and he was a guy, like Steve said, kind of pushed back against the two major ruling bodies at this time, which were the French monarchies, which is the French king, and then in religion, which was the Catholic Church at the time. And he pushed back. And this time period when you really started to think about these things was called the Enlightenment. And the Enlightenment just led to actually the formation of our country. The United States followed Voltaire's ideas. And that's why, as a history teacher, I teach that stuff, right? But one of the biggest ideas during this time period, which I did not know, which because I'm just teaching some of these facts, was this idea of optimism. It was one of the predominating ideas that said, hey, let's use reason, and God uses reason. And so there's evil on this earth because God's not just letting it happen. There's a reason for it.
Right.
And Voltaire didn't buy in.
I forgot to look up what the, etymology of the word it was, but I definitely do remember reading about how the word was new at that, like when you say,
optimism.
Right. That they give it that extra title of optimism, that was kind of in itself a little bit of a joke, because it was this new term that kind of referred to this philosophy that Gottfried Leibniz had.
Right.
Leibniz was this philosopher at that time period that he's essentially skewering throughout that book for his idea that, this was the best of all possible worlds. I thought that was kind of interesting that this was a new term at that time.
And they give Voltaire, so he takes this idea, and in the book, even if you read the introduction, it says, listen, Voltaire didn't get Leibniz's philosophy exactly right. He was attacking it as in a general way, right? And so, but what Voltaire was saying, he was seeing that what had happened not too long ago during that time, there was a major earthquake in Lisbon. Is that correct? Lisbon, pain and suffering going on. And as a guy, Voltaire was one of the first guys to say freedom of religion, or freedom to believe in what you want to believe. He was going and push back a little bit on a God and what the belief of, especially Catholic Church's belief of a God. He was saying, so you're coming with a reason at me that there's a God, but there's such a loophole in this God that cares about humans as a part of our life, that you're saying, okay, God cares about you, and if you do good, you're going to be rewarded. Yet there's so much evil and suffering, such as with this earthquake, that doesn't make sense. That doesn't add up. And then Leibniz comes along and says, well, the reason for it is God has a plan. We may not know it, but it's all good. It's very good. And what did he call it? The best of all possible worlds.
Right. The best of all possible worlds. So everything happened, so the entire short novella, as you said, short book, is just tackling this idea of how do you solve the problem of evil? Like how can an all-powerful, omniscient, all-benevolent God allow evil in the world? And this is a problem that I guess, many philosophers have tackled, most, somewhat unsatisfactorily, I guess. And Leibniz was, annoyingly unsatisfactory to Voltaire's sensibilities. And had this philosophy of, in the beginning of the book, it kind of talks about this whole idea of, everything has its cause and effect, and those things are all leading to a good outcome. And noses were meant to have spectacles, therefore we have spectacles. Feet were meant to have stockings, therefore we have stockings, and that's all that it ever could be in this best of all possible worlds. And it starts off in a pretty good world. They're in this at the castle in Westphalia, which my ancestors came from. So it's another,
nice.
Not necessarily that exact castle, but Westphalia.
Right.
And they're in the Baron, the Baron of Thunder Ten Tronc is this nobility there in Westphalia, and he has this castle, and Candide lives in there as a relative of the barons. And it's it does seem like it's the best of all possible worlds, but then it quickly starts to fall apart.
Right. So first thing major he falls off is he kisses his cousin. And his
cousin, but I feel like we should back up for a second. How she got inspired for that was he has his, another main character in this book is his tutor, Pangloss, Dr. Pangloss, and his name is sort of a Pan, and Gloss is all talk or all tongue.
Right.
So he's the big
spout. He represents Leibniz's theory of optimism.
So he's always spouting this best of all possible worlds philosophy. And Cunegong, the main female protagonist,
And her name means something too.
yes, her name's got a little innuendo to it.
Right.
But that's essentially, is Candide's girlfriend throughout this book. But when they're in the castle together, Cunegong sees the professor Pangloss getting it on with a chambermaid in the bushes, and that inspires her to make a move on Candide. And then he indeed does give her a kiss, and then that leads to kicks on the backside. When the Baron sees this going on, he ends up getting his butt kicked and thrown out of the castle. But I want to read, because I do
yeah, definitely
find it. The description of Pangloss getting busy with the chambermaid was also pretty hilarious to me. So it says, one day, well, this is on page 2 of that, I think, of the book you have. One day while Cunegong was walking near the castle in the little woods they call a park, she saw Dr. Pangloss in the underbrush. He was giving a lesson in experimental physics to her mother's maid, a very attractive and obedient brunette. As Miss Cunegong had a natural bent for the sciences, she watched breathlessly the repeated experiments which were going on. She saw clearly the doctor's sufficient reason, observed both cause and effect, and returned to the house in a distracted and pensive frame of mind, yearning for knowledge and dreaming that she might be the sufficient reason for young Candide, who might also be hers. I just thought this, his sort of like intellectual description of, it's
of sex.
Right. It's just the professor boning the chambermaid, and his hilarious intellectual description of these repeated experiments of natural philosophy.
And that is exactly where your buddy, I think, got hung up the first time around.
Yeah.
You're not, at least me, at first, I wasn't expecting it. I mean,
right. What's happening here?
Yes. And so you're thinking of these just the type of book you're reading. And then you go back the second time and it's hilarious. Right. But it takes a second to kind of get in that mind frame. Yes, exactly. You need somebody to set you up.
Absolutely. Like if you're presenting this in class, like kids, it's a lot like, Romeo and Juliet, when Mercutio is making a lot of these jokes to Romeo. Like if you're not a little familiar with what's going on in the vernacular there, you're gonna miss the joke.
Right over your head.
Yeah.
Right.
Right
over your head.
That was hilarious.
Oh, it is hilarious.
And then so essentially it begins with him getting kicked out of Eden. All right.
And then ridiculousness ensues. I mean, he gets kicked out of Eden, and we're going to come back to Eden later, because essentially that's the end. They're going to come back to this garden. But I don't even know. So much craziness happened. Murder, rape, torture, sex, travel everywhere. I don't even know. And this is it. Is there a specific, except for El Dorado, is there something we even need to discuss in a conversation? I mean, is there
I will say that, like, I think Voltaire is a person who felt very strongly about the evils that he witnessed in the world and the injustices that he saw, but his way of tackling it was with this kind of ridiculous, brutal matter of factness to his descriptions. Like I said, it is like a real dark, weird humor to it, where these tragedies were happening all the time, and so his way of his way of like of describing the brutality. It's rough in that regard. Like it's a rough.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think you nailed it too. It's rough, and he makes light of it. He makes a joke of it, and they always come back. This is the book Optimism. All these people pretty much come back and be like, it was what it was. Yeah, that was horrible. That, and I don't even want to mention some of the stuff. I mean, I'm thinking of the old woman. What happened to them?
I want to keep talking, but at some point, I had one part where I had drawn a few lines because I was going to read the description.
Yeah. I mean, it is like when the woman goes back, the old woman tells her story, you're just taken aback. And these things happened exactly like you said.
So this is even, this is just on page 5. This is after they run into the Bulgars.
Right.
So he's getting conscripted into this army after he gets thrown out. He's being conscripted into this army. He got kind of tricked into, and I do like the line when they've put him into this war. It uses the sentence that Candide was trembling like a philosopher.
That's great. I don't remember that.
Which I thought was funny during the war in hiding. But there's a part in chapter 3 where it says, they were at this village which the Bulgars had burned in strict accordance with the laws of war. Here, old men, stunned with beatings, watched the last agonies of their butchered wives, who still clutched their infants to their bleeding breasts. There, disemboweled girls who had first satisfied the natural needs of various heroes breathed their last. Others, half scorched in the flames, begged for their death stroke. Scattered brains and severed limbs littered the ground.
Hell.
Like that's kind of par for the course throughout.
Yes, right. Dark and hell, and yeah, right. I mean, just to imagine that, and that happens, people. If you've not read this book, that's not one scene. He goes through this type of thing a few times.
And like I said, I feel like, somebody could feel like, that there's a certain trivial way in which he's describing these horrible things, but I think, for a man of his time, this is a guy who thought a lot about this problem and really cared quite a bit about these injustices. And he was a big champion of human rights throughout his life. And it was just like, this was the best way to skewer this situation. And
he had to say, this hell that I'm describing is reality to people. Right. And how can you say that this is what God intended? How can you say that this is the best of all worlds, and that in some way, shape, or form, this is how some people were to be treated?
Right.
He got Voltaire saying, this is your theory is ridiculous.
And I'm not a big, I don't know much about the intricacies of European history, but I do know that just a few years before this book comes out in 1759, the 7 Years' War is going on in Europe. And that's a war that's, it's almost like a World War I thing. It's, different. It's essentially the world at that time in this various land wars. So tons of these atrocities and horrible events of war were happening around him. And then, like you said, in 1755 in Portugal, Lisbon has this earthquake. And this earthquake, have you read much about that?
Yeah, it became a tsunami. I mean, it wasn't just, it was devastating. One thing after another.
I don't remember learning much about it, but yeah.
Again, no, I never, before Candide, I've never heard anything about it. Right.
So, but I it's got its own Wikipedia entry. So it was a pretty big cataclysm. But they said that, somewhere between 10 and 30,000, maybe even more people died within a few days. They said it was one of the worst earthquakes that's in recorded history.
Wow.
So this earthquake, I think, like you said, it takes place out in the ocean, and it's like an 8.5 in Lisbon. And, obviously you get the buildings falling, with their own structural problems, but a tsunami comes in on top of that and wipes out the port. But they also said this is happening during this November 1st, the All Saints Day, a feast of the saints. And so people have lit candles in their windows and stuff. So the shaking and everything.
That's right. The fires right afterwards.
This is like a horrible conflagration of fire on top of a tsunami, on top of an earthquake. And then, it all ties into this idea, directly into that idea of trying to explain evil in the world, because it's happening on a religious holiday as well. People are being crushed in church, essentially. And why
you're saying this is something God?
Why would God allow this?
Right, right. And what's interesting is that this really affected Voltaire, this earthquake, because he had written that whole other, I guess it was a poem, which I was going to get to and read, but I did not. But it was a whole poem that he wrote a few years before he wrote Candide. And brought it up again. So this must have been something, like you said, it's interesting that especially I teach world history, that it's, nowhere in there. But this is something that really affected this guy and made him think about the world that he lives in. This much suffering.
Yeah. I've always been pretty fascinated with the Black Death and the reoccurrence of plague. And, and in London, trying to think if that was around 1660s, 1660s, somewhere in there is when they had their big plague in London. And you know, I think Voltaire is born a little after that. I think he was born in maybe
65. Yes. No, oh, is it? Yeah, that might be.
That sound
Yeah,
right?
right? Yep.
So he's just in the tail end of some of these like reoccurring throughout it, these giant plagues that everybody's had to go through. You know, the 1600s are the beginning of the Royal Society. You know, science is sort of, you know,
oh yeah, it's coming about. Yeah,
starting to percolate. You know, Galileo's
scientific revolution. Yeah,
telescopes and stuff. So it's it's percolating a little bit there, but you're still kind of living in the dark ages at the same time as well, you know. And
right. Well, they still have divine right of kings. You know, God is looking more than we can even imagine right now. People still pray and, you know, play, help me win this football game today, right? But back then it was real.
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
And that's why I think, you know, Voltaire is a big advocate of empiricism and this, you know, kind of trying to strip away the superstition of the time. Yeah, I don't know. I just find it interesting in that regard. You know, as I said, I teach photography. And so photography got me interested in, I don't want to divert too much, but I just want to say that photography had me thinking about lenses and like you couldn't have photography until you had decent lenses. You didn't really have decent glass very much until certainly the Middle Ages, and they're really not really getting that great at it until or at least cheaper lenses until the 1500s, 1600s. And there's a real push for lenses when the printing press comes around. So in the late 1400s, the printing press is invented.
With lenses?
Yeah, it's because people start nobody.
Oh, that makes sense.
So few people read. There was so little literacy. No one cared. And now that books were something that the middle class could get a hold of, people began to realize I can't see. Mm-hmm. And so there was a big push for lenses, and then that becomes a big deal. And then people start messing around with the lenses. And you have, and two things happen. Galileo starts, and others start putting together these lenses and looking up and seeing the stars and moons and things. And Van Leeuwenhoek starts, he's a haberdasher who uses lenses to look at cloth. They're like a cloth salesman. And he starts looking at the microscopic. And essentially in the 1600s, you have these two groups of people that are starting to realize there are things above and below that Aristotle and the Bible do not talk about.
Empiricism, like you said, the idea that, hey, we can't just go, we have to go by experimentation. All right.
If the Bible doesn't cover it, then the ancients did, you know, Aristotle and Plato. Between these two, that's really all you need to know. And you don't need to be doing your own investigations into the world.
Yeah. And Aristotle just would say, I think this is what the heavens look like. You know, that's what I thought about it so much.
It should all be perfect. You know, everything has to be like a Platonic ideal. You know, the orbits have to be perfectly circular. They can't be elliptical. So I do find Voltaire's place in this is very interesting, where he's just coming, you know, it's really starting to percolate now.
Yes, you have to take that into consideration, where he is, when he is at this time. Definitely. Yeah. I agree. But, you know, I feel so dumb because that is awesome. That point, I teach the scientific revolution. I teach the Enlightenment. I teach Galileo and all this, and I teach the printing press is right before my thing, but I obviously know, but just to think that printing press, I mean, the amount of stuff that comes out of that, obviously the Reformation and everything, crazy social changes, but the scientific changes with the lenses that's mind blowing. Yeah, I feel dumb for not knowing that. That's crazy.
I got so obsessed with it that I started trying to look for a book that was just on the importance of glass.
Right.
And I couldn't find a book like that. However, there is a book called How the World Changed, I think, that has a chapter on glass, because I've really become kind of obsessed with this idea about how you don't hear a lot of, you don't talk a lot about it in class or anything, but really, glass is the first artificial intelligence, maybe, or it's an extension of the human senses. Meaning, prior to really good lenses, your investigations of the world involved the same tools, the same senses everyone
for a million years,
hundreds of thousands of years, yeah, for millions of years, since the dawn of mankind. That was all that you had. And lenses were the first tool that was like, now you're going to have a
superpower
to your vision, the ability to see above and below in a way that you never could before. And this just, blows minds, because you just start to realize, like, there are entire worlds above and below that we have been unaware of.
That's amazing. Yeah, that is crazy. I got to bring that into my curriculum, Steve.
Yeah, there really ought to be I don't want to keep diverting this.
No, go ahead.
There truly ought to be a class in high school on the history of science. Like, you just realize science's role in our society and in our modern world is so huge that we have these classes that are specific. Here's your botany, your zoology, and your chemistry, and then you have your general history class. But science is so important, and so. And
it doesn't exist. There's no history of science.
History of science class that ought to be in high school.
I agree. That's a great idea, and I love reading, history books on science. I learn. I mean,
it's fascinating.
Yeah, Bill Bryson does a hell of a job. Even
I love it. It's funny. That's the book that I've been really bad. I've been so obsessed with political stuff that I have been really bad about my reading lately. But the book that I managed to do during the summer was his book, The Body.
The Body. Yep. And I'm working my way slowly through it too, and it's fascinating. And it's one of those books where you can take your time with, because it's
it's both easy to pick up and easy to put down, which has got its neck, because it's not a plot really,
Right. Yeah. You can learn about the brain, or you can learn about whatever the heck you want. Yeah. And everything is like, whoa, it really is amazing. All right. To go back.
Because I'm really good at diversions.
And I love diversions. See, that's the thing about these talks I love, is because, I'm not here to teach people about the book. I want the people to read the book by themselves. When I read a book, I need to get certain things out. I need to ask certain questions. I need to divert. So this is perfect. This is what I think it's all about, because how many times when you're reading these books, I mean, that's what my mind is doing anyways. Like, oh man, that reminds me of this, and that reminds me of this, and that's the fun of it. So no, I appreciate that.
I would also say one of the fun things that you would hope people would do with books is I think I was pretty deep into adulthood before I started really letting books lead me to books, like going from a book and then something captures a little bit of, like, let's say the Lisbon earthquake. Like, I might look up and see, is there a book on the Lisbon earthquake? Yep. And then I might read that book. That's a really good way to kind of help tie things together in your mind, help you remember what you read last, because the next thing you went to was tied to it in some way.
Oh yeah, 100%. Yep. And you're right. I think it wasn't until I was really into books for a while that I started to do that. Like, you have that freedom to do, you don't have to wait for the next big book. It's to, hey, I want to dig into this a little bit.
Right.
So let's go to his philosophy. We know that Voltaire is against this optimism idea. He is a deist. He believes, he's not against religion. He's not an atheist. He believes that in deism, where God is like this overall being that kind of got the universe going, like they use the clockmaker analogy. He gets it going, sets it, and lets it go back. And I think, he's not involved in whether you're going to win the sports game tonight or whether you're going to get better at your sickness.
Right.
He's kind of stepped back. And so he sees this idea of God doing evils is just ridiculous. Now, when I want to go through two things. Number one, I kind of want to support Leibniz's idea. Does that sound crazy?
No. I mean, first of all, everyone wants to be optimistic, right?
Right. And I want to look at Leibniz's idea not as a humanist, but as a macro worldview, right? That And I think that might be where, because they said, and I haven't read Leibniz, but he said that he didn't nail it anyways. And I'd have to see what he's saying. But I think that, and I go back and forth, I don't know, but maybe, on as far as the world, I just believe in Mother Nature. I believe in physics, right? I believe in that science. I believe that physics and Mother Nature create a balance overall. Now, that means very little to the micro guy, the guy that's, getting killed by cancer, right? Again, so that's you got to take almost this non-emotional approach. But almost if you take this large world view that everything is for the best, I can understand that. Now, that doesn't. Let me offer you a caveat that I hate it. Like when somebody calls and says, "Well, this was God's will," or "It's all for the best." You can't do that on a micro personal level. That's wrong. It's callous.
Yeah.
But you see what I'm saying, though. But the theory.
Yeah. I mean, I would say it this way: is that even Voltaire accepts the first part of Leibniz's premise in a way, and that he understands the world. There is no other world but this world. The world is, Leibniz's philosophy is the world is what it is. And then therefore, since there's a God, it must be the best of all possible worlds.
Right.
Where Voltaire is taking the first part and saying it's true. The world is what it is. And maybe you need to make the best of it. But it may not necessarily, what does that mean to say it's the best of all possible worlds? I mean, obviously, anybody could imagine a few quick changes that might have greatly improved the situation. And then he's skewering every element in which it does go awry, from natural disasters of, the tsunamis and the fires and the earthquakes, and then the moral disasters of man's inhumanity against man, and all of the wars and rape and auto da fes, which we should talk about.
But do you understand my point where, this is what it all went to me, and the thing clipped in was, you look at the earth as this natural organism, and we have become almost a cancer to the earth, right? And so these things that are happening, we've created global warming and climate change, and creating hurricanes and these types of things, and then the way man's inhumanity to man because overpopulation and living, it's almost like that's horrible. Nobody wants anything to happen on a micro level, but that's just a humanist view. That's me as a human. But maybe I'm speaking for the trees or another species that's going to be killed off in the next 100 years. I'm looking at it as maybe the earth and Mother Nature and physics are really doing what's good for overall.
And that was part of the religious look at it too, of just, you're too dumb to understand this, that there's a, and, I mean, in some respects we could be, there's this idea that, this does work for good in some great way that you can't fathom.
We don't understand. Right.
Mind. But like you said, when you're in the moment watching your 6-year-old deal with leukemia,
right.
The most comforting philosophy.
No, it's not comforting at all. No, I remember my good buddy told me his son got diagnosed. It wasn't life-threatening, right? But it was not something you'd want. Nobody wants their son to have anything. But people would come up to him and say, "Oh, it's God's will. It'll be. This is meant to be, and He'll work it out." And it's just like, how can you even say that? That's horrible.
It's always upsetting. I've been through. I've been to many churches and things where I became, as an adult, I became more and more upset with any sermon where somebody would suggest that, that so-and-so had gotten over their breast. Isn't it great that so-and-so overcome their breast cancer, and thankfully God answered their prayers and essentially made it seem like their righteousness or God's.
This one saved. Yeah.
Like, how about my aunt who died? Was she
right?
She wasn't good enough.
She do something wrong. Right.
Oh, so there's something very onerous about that. I'm going to tell you, this is another brief aside, but I think it's kind of touches into this. I'll tell you about a miracle in my life that was kind of a true miracle, but also an illustration of the absurdity of this idea of God's personal interaction with your life. I was out in Chesapeake Bay one time, and I lost a mask that a friend had let me borrow. And we were teenagers, and I went back and told him, and he said, "You're going to owe me $20 for that mask." Because, you know, we were all poor and had no money and living on the beach for this holiday. And I went back out into the water, and I'm looking for the mask. And I truly said a little prayer, and I said, "God, help me. This would be a good time for a miracle because I don't have this $20. So help me find the mask that I lost out here." And I don't find it. And as I'm coming back to shore, I'm like, well, you blew an opportunity to really show me here, God, and really make me a believer and give me this
stick.
And this is absolutely true. A $20 bill just comes in.
Whoa.
Yes, in the water. And so, I mean, I find this. I go back. I tell my friends, and first of all, they just think it's too crazy of a story. You know, it's the exact amount of money he said I was going to owe him. And they're like, you're lying. I said, smell this $20 bill, because it smelled like Davy Jones' locker. It had been in the ocean for a while. But the funny thing is, the more that seems very much like the answering of a prayer.
Sure.
But then you think to yourself of all of the prayers that aren't being answered, that are infinitely more important than my $20 bill, and you don't really know how to reconcile that. You know, you're like, how can I tell that story in a church, knowing that Gary lost his 5-year-old to lymphoma, and he was on his knees in tears every night for a simple miracle, and I'm getting a $20 bill washed in front of me. You know what? How are you supposed to make sense of that?
And in there, optimism. I don't know. Back then, it might have been just something that I might have I might have believed in, because it doesn't sound bad. It doesn't.
It's very compelling to see it from your perspective. It feels like attention is being paid to me from above. It is the weird stepping outside of yourself moment where you realize like the incongruity of your thought at least with a benevolent, or what you would normally consider. I don't know. When I was in college, I was very obsessed with Joseph Campbell, the psychologist. And when I read Candide, it makes me think of Joseph Campbell had a line where he said, essentially that most of life was learning how to participate joyfully in a sorrowful world. And that seems like what Voltaire's trying to say, figure out. How can you live? How can you participate joyfully in a sorrowful world?
Let's go to that. That'll be my last question. Okay. The end, right? So the end. You want to explain what happens at the end, or you?
So since we have given the viewer so much diversion from the end, they were like, I thought I was going to hear more about Candide. So we'll
read it.
We'll say first you should read it. It's such a short book that you have no real excuse. Right. We'll also briefly say that it's only 30 chapters. It's a kind of an episodic little novella. The first 10 chapters take place in Europe and all these trials and travails that Candide's going through. Then they run off to the New World and they find El Dorado.
I forgot about it.
When he gets to El Dorado, he's in this perfect world, but even then he's not happy. He doesn't have Cunegonde. He's got all the riches and everything he could want, but
everybody's enlightened.
Everything's taken care of.
Right.
He's still pining for something else. So Voltaire getting to the idea of like, some people are just never going to be happy, essentially.
Right.
And so you get 10 chapters there, and then you get 10 chapters when they get back to the New World. And everyone that dies in this book keeps coming back. I thought there was something kind of funny about that too, of like,
ridiculousness.
That was a way of getting at, I don't know if I'm right about this, if it was just a literary, affectation or technique, but it also made me think about the idea of reincarnation, almost in a way of just like saying, this is a story that keeps getting, it doesn't matter if someone dies, the story goes on. That's Vonnegut's, I can't remember what book it is, where he always ends with, so it goes.
Oh gosh. Slaughterhouse-Five.
Yeah. So it goes, right? Yep. Like there'll be all these horrible tragedies, but these main characters keep popping back up and surviving their
Well, let's go to that real quick. You're right. And I think that did have a message, because he personified it with the old woman, I believe. Because he kind of, like you say, you see it happens with Pangloss. You think he's dead. Nope. Miracle, whatever. Survived. It happened with who else? the young
Uganda. It happens to almost all of the main characters, really.
You think they're gone, and then they come back. And the only person that really talks about it though is the old woman, and I think she's just called the old woman.
Has a good part where she says, I don't remember who starts the conversation, but Kuniganda, or maybe the old woman says, yeah, you know, they're having some contest or some discussion about whose life's been the hardest.
Mm-hmm, right.
You know, and she's like, probably me. And Kuniganda is like, are you kidding me? And she has this funny part where she's like, unless you've been raped twice by a Bulgar, had your castle destroyed twice by, and kind of goes through all these horrors that, you know, that befallen her with, you know, did this happen to you twice? And then she tells this horrific, I can't even remember everything that happens to her, but she's under bodies, her family's slaughtered around. She's the one, the old
worst story ever. Yeah.
Half of her butt is cut off.
Right.
Half a buttock in order to feed these. That was a great mercy shown to her by her captors. They were just they were starving, and instead of killing her straight out, they cut off one of her buttocks and eat it.
Right.
Stay alive, and she manages to show. But again, like, you know, everyone thinks their own pile of miseries is the winning pile, and they also had a case to be made for sure.
Sure. And then this old lady comes out and, like, you don't think she's going to beat it, and she's ridiculous. But she comes out with this line that, I mean, I don't remember what the quote was, but she says, life is better than death, essentially.
Right. Yes, exactly. That
as much shit you've been through, I'm still glad I'm alive.
There was correct. That there's just this desire, this will to live pushes you through things, even often when other people might be like, I could understand why you might throw in the towel.
But that is a couple things with that. One, it's this optimism. It's crazy optimism. I don't know if Voltaire was trying to say that was crazy optimism. Do you think so? Was that his point there?
Well, I do think if we're going to get to the culmination of what we were talking about, that, you know, he ends this novel with this idea of you need to cultivate your own garden.
Right.
And I do think that part of cultivating your own garden is this idea of you need to get busy. If you get too lost in your thoughts, if you sit there and just dwell upon the injustices of this world, to which there might not be a great answer. Right. You know, we may not know in this realm why evil reigns on the just and the unjust, and often in disproportionate amounts. Well, why would that be? If you allow yourself to get too lost in that thought, you know, that could lead to depression.
You dwell on it, and that's just going to be your life. Your life is that dwelling on that. But I saw another part too, though, is that so much at that part, we talked about Candide and Voltaire during the time period, was so much focus on the afterlife, right? That doesn't get talked about, but I think that, I don't know, maybe it's just my own take on it. I think that might have been a stab there too. Do you see where I'm going with that? Like,
well, you could argue, okay, that's a good point, because you could argue, as we were sort of starting to allude at the very beginning, is they start off in this sort of pseudo Eden. They're in the barren, you know, they're in this, and he kind of makes a joke about, you know, it's such a great castle because it has windows and tapestries, so it must be an awesome castle. So they're in this Eden, and then all these horrors befall them, and then it ends in an Eden, so to speak, of like, but his idea of you have to cultivate your own garden is essentially a way of saying you need to find your heaven on earth. You need to find a way to make this manageable. And this is an overwhelming planet. The problems that have beset mankind are going to be too much for you to tackle. But maybe if you try to tackle your little square, you know, in fact, it makes me think of, in a weird way, don't you think it's a little bit like the 70s, what is that? The bumper sticker of think globally, act locally.
Well,
you ever seen that bumper sticker?
Yes. And I did not think of that, but you are being more kind than I am to him during this.
That could be absolutely true. Like, I definitely feel like I'm reading what I want to read into.
No, but that's why we're talking about
the end of that. But I don't think it's entirely without textual support. So
no, definitely no. That's why I'm glad you said it, because no, I think you're right. We look at, but I think what part of me, I look at Voltaire as this liberal hero, right? This guy that's out there and he's bringing these enlightenment ideas, but the end, to me, especially the second time through, was disappointing. It was more of an Anne Rand type ending where I can't fix these problems. The world has these horrible problems, and so I'm going to take care of my garden,
right,
our garden.
Yeah, our garden is a different way to say it, though, isn't it?
It is, but he's not talking about. I think he's talking about him and Kunamandi, Mandi, and
right.
it just. I don't think he's saying our community. Do you?
I'm leaving it open. Let me just say this. I feel like my interpretation jibes a little bit with Voltaire's life.
Yeah.
And,
no, I'm glad you said it. Yeah.
Voltaire was a man who definitely was at the forefront of pushing for, humanitarian reforms. And there's a, if you do a little bit that I have read about his life, there was this guy, I can't think of his name, Calais, I want to say, who had been accused of murdering his son. I think he was a Protestant who was accused of murdering his son, who allegedly was going to convert to Catholicism. And the Catholics said, you killed him because he was going to convert to Catholicism. And that for some reason, they kind of run up these trumped up charges against him. I think everyone at modern times thinks that this was a trumped up situation. The guy's son had actually committed suicide. He had not been murdered by the father, but they broke the father on the wheel. I mean, this was a torture where they would strap you to a wheel and break your bones individually. I mean, I think I think that's a big part of Voltaire's mind, is like, this life is horrible enough. Why are we compounding it with the miseries of war, and particularly just torture, really, that was so prevalent at that time period.
That's good. I'm glad and you're changing my point of view, because I'm thinking of Ayn Rand, and I'm like, this guy at the end is selfish. He's saying, you know how many people I get on Facebook or whatever, it just says, Mike, you have a great family. Just worry about your family.
Right.
You know what I mean? And honestly, I think that's when I'm reading the end of this, I'm like, wait, is Voltaire telling me the same thing?
Yeah, like I said, I feel like you got to mix it a little bit with the story of his life and what he did.
You do.
I want to jump back for one quick second just to mention something we had skipped, which was, when Candide and the crew land in the port there of in Lisbon in Portugal after this, actually during this horrible earthquake and all these things happen. So here's all these horrible natural disasters. I mean, my God, we got to do something. Look at what the world has thrown into our lap. But the answer of the human beings in that community was, he said, that the church could think of nothing better than to offer up a great auto de fe. And this auto de fe was this sort of performance of burning heretics.
Right.
So they're, and they, of course, had got wrapped. Pangloss had shared his philosophy, which was heretical to the people in that town. So they're all going to get burned to death. But there's just this kind of this dark joke made about the fact of, like, it's not enough that the miseries that the world is bestowed upon you through nature alone, that you guys are now going to torture each other on top of it. I mean, I do feel like, I'd like to think that his cultivate your garden is sort of the 1700s version of think globally, act locally. I've got to tend. I can't overwhelm myself. I've got to try to carve out what I can do within my space, and that idea of keeping occupied. I got to keep occupied. I got to put my nose to the grindstone and try to carve out my own little slice of heaven. And for some people, that could be retreating into self, like you said, like a selfish.
Right.
But for other people, it could be, my desire to better my community, better myself, and better my community. And I don't know. That's my optimistic.
I'm glad. Well, yeah, I'm glad you said that, because honestly, I couldn't see past what I had read into it. But, and I was reading, I'm like, well, just from where I was coming from, I'm like, he never talks about, it's always fleeing. He never talked about the problems that were like, hey, this is the problem. Like, how or why could we fix it? You know what I mean? It was always like, oh, this happened and we had to go there, or I paid him off, or this and that. It was never, I'm just telling you where my mind was at the end. My mind then took all that, like, rushing past me, and I saw, yeah, his mind almost, Voltaire wanted to ignore these things that he couldn't fix. You know, it's a big world.
Yeah.
These things were going to happen, and said, all you can do to stay sane, if you're going to stay sane, is control what you can control. And what you can control is your own garden, your own self, your own family. But no, I'm glad you brought up, that's why we're talking. I'm glad you brought up the alternative. It makes me feel better about Voltaire, because that makes much more sense with Voltaire. You know, that's who he is and who I teach that the man is.
And I think it is a partial recognition of the fact that you aren't really going to come to a satisfactory answer for why there is evil in this world. And that was Leibniz's attempt to solve this thing. And it was a very unsatisfactory philosophical solution. And I think this is a kind of a coming to a recognition of, look, we don't know. We're not going to know why there are evils. The best you can do is try to figure out how to participate joyfully in a sorrowful world. How are you going to carve out your own little niche? And I don't know. That was
live. Life is better than death. Life is good.
I don't know why this popped into my mind too, but another thing that stuck out to me was the release of this book is almost exactly 100 years before Darwin's natural selection, Darwin's Origin of Species book. But there's a funny little part where did you remember I can't remember who says it, but there's a funny part where he refers to human beings as featherless bipeds with a soul.
I don't remember that.
And it made me laugh, because also I knew it must have been some allusion, because when I was in junior high, I'd read a really funny Woody Allen book called Without Feathers, which was an allusion to this, because I thought maybe Voltaire had said it, but it's Plato. It goes back to Plato.
Oh, wow.
Where when they were trying to distinguish what makes a human being, how can you describe a human being? What would be your definition? And they had said a featherless biped. And then I guess Diogenes or another philosopher came and plucked a chicken and threw it in and said, I give to you Plato's man.
Oh, wow.
And so that he added, a featherless biped with a soul.
With a soul, yeah, to make it different.
But I thought there was something that kind of alludes to the empiricism, this beginning of looking at human beings as not necessarily something separated out by, part of the order, part of the animal kingdom, and subject to the same laws. And
I think you're making me think too, and you have your own fate. You can control, if you're controlling yourself in your garden and you're not trying to take over kingdoms or whatever, you have your own fate. You're going to be able to deal with that a lot better.
Yeah.
And this craziness that, think of all the things he was trying to do out in the world, and look at the kings. I mean, how many kings, every king that he discussed in the whole book was dethroned or killed or, and so, I think your point, I think you made a good point, with the idea that think locally, control what you can control.
Also, you could add that, Pascal said all of man's troubles come from his inability to sit alone quietly in a room. So you can just do that.
That's it. No, I think
most of life's troubles.
No, but I think that goes exactly to what Candide's saying, don't you? Now that you said that, I mean,
there's parts of it. I mean, he's definitely saying, if you're, if you're an active agent in the world, you're going to see and endure some of life's injustices, and then you've got to find a way to reconcile that. And tending your garden is better than some solutions.
No, I agree. Awesome. Thanks, Steve. This was a good one, man. We dug in.
Any viewer, I have almost an ADD approach to things like this. I like to.
I told somebody I did the guy I did this with 3 weeks ago. He kind of wrote me afterwards and apologized about this or that. And I said, you know what? Thank you for people that watch. I love you. That's great. But really, I'm doing this for a very selfish reason.
Well, I think it's awesome that you're doing it.
Yeah, thank you. But the selfish reason is this, it's just me and you breaking down little thoughts, you helping me understand things better, or whoever I'm talking to, and just working out. Books are, they're so personal, right? While you're reading it, but as you're reading it, you're like, man, I gotta talk about this, right? And
Right.
so that's what this is all about. I don't care how many tangents we go on or stay into it, or if the guy trying to pay attention, hopefully they just see how interested we are in what we're talking about. And
Well,
say,
that's what I
I'm going
think.
to grab that book.
First of all, hats off to you. I think it's absolutely awesome that you're taking the time to do this. I do hope, I've been excited by seeing some of the different podcasts that you've already done. I think that that you're right on about the fact that people, if you've never done one before, and besides this with you, I'm not actively in a book club right now, but I have on and off been in book clubs. And I think that one of the great thing about book clubs is, you're right, people are very busy and it's sometimes hard to read a book. If they do read a book, there is a sense of accomplishment, but no one really cares, right? If it's just them.
Right.
And so one of the things that's nice about a book club is it gives you that sense of, it gave me a goal. I felt a little fire under me because I knew we were going to meet on a certain day.
Right.
So I got the book read, and then I get a little satisfaction of, I do get to sit down and talk with people about it. And the book clubs that I've been involved in, quite often, they encouraged and or forced me, however you want to look at it, encouraged me to read books that I would never have read. Like I'm obsessed with nonfiction, and I would have not read Memoirs of a Geisha or something if I had not been in a book club. And it was a fascinating book.
Yep. That's what I love. So many people have come to me, and sometimes I'll offer them books, or I'll say, or whatever you're reading, let me have it. And that's the same exact thing. I've read a few books so far that I probably would have never touched because they wanted to go that route. So
I would also
I agree.
like to say that I am also extremely envious and amazed by your prodigious collection of books, because I have seen enough on Instagram of your house to know that there's probably very few rooms that haven't been taken up. I'd like to think that I'm a person with a pretty good personal library, but you might have me beat, I think.
Well, I gave about 300 away 2 months ago. Kim, I was going to put them in another room. I was going to build another shelf, and she said, no. You got to get rid of them. So I got on Facebook and gave them away, and then I donated a bunch too. So I'm going to try to keep them at, I have a level of like 700. I want to keep it there.
Before we go, did you ever go, just thinking of amazing book related things, on McMicken, there used to be a used bookstore just called Used Bookstore, I think, or something on McMicken. A former teacher that had worked at, I want to say West High or Walnut Hills, ran this little bookstore on McMicken in the rough section, kind of right down there, downtown, still kind of not far from that Imperial Theater, the dilapidated Imperial Theater.
Right.
But it was just like it was one of these row houses.
Wow.
And it was just 4 stories of solid books.
That's awesome.
And when I was a young man,
I've never been there.
We would just go, and the guy it was just this one guy. There were no employees. It was one dude. And you could just go up and fall on a couch in one of these rooms and read books all day long.
That's amazing. It's heaven.
I wonder if anybody that views, when you put this together in the remarks, if anyone has ever been to that bookstore, they should say something.
Let me know. But you've been to Ohio bookstore.
Yeah, that's pretty cool too.
That's cool too. It's not the same. You can't really chill up in those things, but they have 4 or 5 stories. And the coolest part is, the lights are all off. So it feels like you're going into your grandpa's attic. You walk up those steps, and then you get to turn the lights on yourself, and then they like flicker on. There's these old, and then you have all these books, and then you can go up to, and you're by yourself usually as you go up into these different floors at the Ohio bookstore. And that's one of those things. If anybody's watching, please go there. It's downtown. I think it's on Sycamore, downtown Cincinnati, and I can't see it being there forever.
So I was gonna say, take your kids
experience.
while there's still bookstores.
Yeah, I did. Right. I took my kids not too long, and they've actually been talking about going back. So
It is upsetting. You know, I have to admit that I do love my ability to get books off Amazon and everything, but you do
it's so
feel like
nice.
something is lost with this feeling of walking through a bookstore and just the randomness of it and
Taking your time. Yes.
depressing to, you know, I have to admit, like, it's been a long time since I've been even in Joseph Beth, which I used to love, just the size of Joseph Beth and
Yep.
walk around in that bookstore and
Do you guys have half price books? What, you go to Coleraine? Is that where you go?
We got nothing over it. We got nothing. We used to have a little. Do we even? We used to have some of the. We had Media Play. That one.
Media Play.
That was a lame.
And you had a Webster's. I used to go to that.
Another one with a W.
Oh, Walden. Because I used to go to that Walden books when I was in high school.
Correct.
Yeah.
Little Walden. Did we?
Walden books. That was about it.
We ever had a Barnes and Noble?
No, never. Nope. No Borders, no Barnes and Noble. But half price books, man, when they came into the scene, 20 years ago, they're a great place. I mean, that is hopefully they go on forever and ever, because it's big, it's affordable, and there's not really anything else like it. There's like 5 locations in Cincinnati, and I visit them as often as I can.
Yeah, it's sad to think that bookstores would get kind of like, it's cool to have the digital world and MP3s are cool, but there's something about a mixtape and putting it together and making it work. Like, something gets lost, man.
There's
like
a feeling.
I don't think there's I don't think there's. I can't imagine that there's really that sort of idea of like the alchemy of the mixtape. If I put these 12 songs on here correctly, surely this woman will be mine. I don't know that really is.
If they're there anymore, maybe they make a playlist.
Their playlist is it, but do they really feel the same way about it? I don't know.
I don't know either. Maybe.
Because they don't have their own. You had to have your own artwork kind of.
Oh yeah, you get to write down the songs for them and maybe a little message on there. Yeah, you get to put a little.
Even get you couldn't just randomly get music.
Oh yeah, it could take you a while, right? Even if you had them all, to put them on a tape still took a while. But if you had to like wait for it to come on the radio or something,
right? Like you had a reason. You had a reason to feel proud about your music collection because you really were out as a hunter-gatherer, right? Serengeti, like finding your prey and bringing it home and curating this collection.
I remember calling into a radio station, like, please play this one. All right, we play it tonight, and then waiting, like they don't play it for like 2 hours.
Yeah, that was exciting.
That's awesome. All right,
Mike,
Steve.
you and I could talk for forever. So that's
heck yeah, we could. I love it.
I hope that you and I can get together for some social. I got to get you down to the Viking Club for the weather.
Hey, let me tell you, my little guy is no longer at daycare on the west side. So what that does is it opens me way up. So because I don't have to pick him up. I don't have to pick him up anymore on my way home. So I'm open for a lot more now.
The art crew has been grabbing some adopted. We pretty much pulled Continenza into our crew. So.
I'm in. Hey, when you go next, definitely. If it goes this week, I'm in.
All right. Well, I really had a pleasure talking with you. It's always great, Mike. I think it's wonderful that you're doing this.
Thanks, Steve. And I appreciate you doing it with me. And I got you back for the spring, right?
I'm excited about that.
All right, brother. Thank you so much, Steve. Bye-bye.